All right, so last time we were in the intestines again, working our way down through the digestive tract. In the intestines, some more about the intestines though, some various features, is that in the mucosal lining, so the innermost lining of the digestive tract in the small intestine, in parts of the small intestine they have what are known as Peyer's patches. We're going to find these at the last part of the small intestine. What is the last part of the small intestine? There's three parts. The ileum, we're going to find Peyer's patches generally in the ileum region. Now, the Peyer's patches are like the immune system cells. They're lymphoid tissue. It's a lymphoid tissue where we're going to find white blood cells. Main reason we have these extra immune type cells in the last part of the small intestine is because what's right after the small intestine? The large intestine, where we have lots and lots of bacteria. And even though we have sphincters and valves to try to prevent backflow, there's still some bacteria that may end up in that last part of the small intestine. Now, we don't want bacteria getting where it shouldn't be, and so we have our Peyer's patches that try to help protect that last part of the small intestine from any bacteria that snuck back through. Now, some of the Peyer's patches may go into the submucosa, which is right below the mucosa. So sometimes they actually go a little bit further. I'm like, the Peyer's patches on here, and I'm like, say we have the mucosa and into the submucosa, there are these dark patches found in the submucosa and the mucosa lining. Now, other things that also help protect in the mucosa lining, we have B lymphocytes that can leave the intestine, enter into the bloodstream and help protect your intestinal lamina propria. And I'm like, the layer that is found in the intestine. So we have, again, more immune cells that they can leave the intestine and go out and try to attack any type of bacteria that may have made it into the blood supply. And then we have in the duodenum, the very first part of the small intestine. We call them duodenal or Brunner's glands. They're a type of mucus gland. They secrete an alkaline mucus to protect that duodenum from that acidic chyme that just came from the stomach. Because the duodenum is the very first part of the small intestine. We have acidic chyme coming from the stomach. Our duodenum, our small intestine, is not built to, by itself, withstand that really low pH, that really acidic material. So we have extra glands to secrete extra alkaline mucus to help protect that first part of the small intestine. Now, our small intestine's busy making lots and lots of juices. We make between 1 and 2 liters of juice. Sometimes I wish I had like a liter bottle and a 2-liter bottle. And I'm like, 1 to 2 liters of intestinal juices, on top of the fact that you're making saliva, and on the top that you're making gastric juices. We have 1 to 2 liters of intestinal juices that are secreted in response to distension. This is the stretching of the intestine, because there's food passing through, stretching it out, and irritation of the mucosa. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's some other type of drug. So anything that irritates the mucosa, your intestine is going to start making additional fluids. Now, your intestinal juices are slightly alkaline, again, to still try to neutralize any of that low pH, that acid coming from the stomach. And it's also isotonic with your blood plasma. What's isotonic mean? There's hypertonic, hypotonic, and isotonic. I was going to say, it means the same. And I'm like, it's the same, it has the same, isotonicity, the same tonicity. And I'm like, which means you're not going to have a lot of water leaving. You're not going to have a lot of water going in. And I'm like, the fluid itself is isotonic with blood plasma. So we don't have a lot of fluid going into the blood or leaving the blood to go into the intestines. That doesn't mean we won't have some absorption rate taking place later. We'll have lots of things being absorbed, but this intestinal juice is not going to cause the absorption. Now, your intestinal juice is mostly water, because we're mostly water. And I'm like, it's enzyme poor. Enzymes come from other things, and it contains some mucus. Again, it helps aid the passage of food as it goes through the intestines. Now, our intestinal juice, since we have lots and lots of absorption of nutrients happening in the small intestine, this intestinal juice helps facilitate transport and absorption of the nutrients, which we'll talk about the actual how we get them absorbed later. Now, some accessory organs Now, they are part of the digestive system, but we call them accessory because food is not actually actively touching these particular organs. That doesn't mean they don't help in digestion. They absolutely do. Food is just not going through them. It's not actually interacting, touching this particular organ like it is with your intestines and your stomach. So 2 big accessory organs. One is the liver, one is the gallbladder. Now, the liver has lots and lots of functions. We're not going to go into all of them, but it's got lots of functions. It cleans the blood and it stores things. The only digestive function I care about, because we're talking about the digestive system, is that it makes bile. Now, bile is a fat emulsifier. Now, that doesn't mean it breaks apart the actual bile itself. It just makes the bile, or it just makes the lipids. It's not breaking apart the fat, it's not breaking apart the lipids, but it makes the lipids not attracted to each other as much. Instead of, if I think of it like a relationship, it doesn't break them up. They're still together, but it may have some influence like, do you really like that person? Oh, maybe I don't really like that person. And they're not as attracted to each other anymore, which means it will be easier for them to break up later. And so that's the emulsifier part of it. It just makes the fat not really want to hang out together. It doesn't physically break it up. It's not breaking bonds. It just makes it so it's not as attracted to each other, which will help when we try to break up fats and absorb it later. So the liver makes the bile. It can secrete the bile, and then the bile can go straight into the intestine. However, we like to have an extra little stockpile of bile that we can store in our gallbladder. So the gallbladder, it just stores it. It does not make it whatsoever. You can live without your gallbladder. Has anyone had their gallbladder removed? No one here? Not yet? You can live without your gallbladder just fine. And I'm like, our body can compensate for the fact that we're not storing it anymore. I'm like, we're still making it. We still have the liver, still making it. You just don't have an extra storehouse. Now, liver is the largest gland in the body, so it's easily the first one that sticks out when you're looking at the cadavers. It is split into 4 lobes. Right and left are kind of like the 2 big parts. If you look underneath, there are 2 additional little lobes. We call it the quadrate and the caudate. And I'm like, so there are 4 lobes. Just like on your lungs, our lungs were split up into lobes. The liver is as well. Some of the ducts, some of this is like review from lab from last week too. We have bile ducts. 1, there's a cystic duct that is coming just from the gallbladder. We have a common hepatic duct or just a hepatic duct that is coming just from the liver, and a common bile duct. Now, Mike, because it is transporting bile from gallbladder and from the liver, we now have your common bile duct. Either way, they're just transporting bile. All of it's transporting bile. Now, if we zoom in on the liver, we have these cool structures. They're hexagons. How many sides are on a hexagon? 6. Someone puts a hex on you. 6 is a bad number. They're 6-sided. They're actually these like six-sided structures. I'm like, they're cool. They actually do have these 6-sided structures. Now, because one of the functions of the liver, it's not digestive, but it is to filter blood out, we have lots and lots of blood going through the liver. So we usually have some type of central vein, and I'm like lots and lots of connective tissue, supporting tissue, inside these liver lobules, inside of these little tiny hexagons where we have blood flowing through. We have liver cells. They're just called hepatocytes. Anything hepat means liver. Cyte means cell. So there are liver cells. And yes, they're going to filter and process nutrient-rich blood. Yay, Fritz. We're happy that our liver does this. It filters out various types of drugs, any type of toxins, does all of that. Digestive system-wise, it makes bile. So they've got that central vein in there, lots of blood supply. And I'm like zoomed in, and I'm like the non-real. Here's the real version. Here's what we tried to draw it out. Now, yes, we've got lots of blood vessels going everywhere, lots of blue and red. However, what other color do you have in here besides blue and red? We also have green because the liver also is making bile. And so it's traveling through these green bile ducts. Now, the kind of cool thing, I'm like at the corners of each of these, so they're hexagons, so there's at 6 different corners, you have, we call them triads because there's 3 different vessels there. There's like an oxygen-rich blood vessel, an oxygen-poor blood vessel, and then you have your bile duct as well. We call it a portal triad. Now, some of the functions of your liver cells. Again, it's not all digestive. Yes, big one, makes bile, is that it will process bloodborne nutrients. And so like the fact that you're eating something, lots of sugar, it can all go there, depending on the different nutrients that are in there. It can detect that, it can sense that. It can help store some fat-soluble vitamins. So some vitamins get stored in our liver, and it detoxifies our blood. So this is why if you're drinking too much alcohol, you can start damaging your liver because it's constantly trying to detoxify all that alcohol out of the blood. I know I've got pictures coming up of damaged liver. Now, cool thing about a liver, it's like the one unique organ that can do that. It can regenerate part of itself if you have to remove it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't grow an entire new liver, but if you removed some of the liver tissue, and I'm like, so you could remove up to 80% of your liver. You still have to have some there. You can't remove it all. But you can remove 80% of your liver, and it will grow new liver. And I'm like, in about 6 to 12 months. Other organs can't do that. So you can remove a whole chunk of liver, and you can grow new liver. However, what's remaining, the 20% had better be healthy all by itself for it to regenerate new tissue. Now, reason why, and I'm like, your hepatocytes have growth factors. So if you injured some of your tissue, whether you moved it, and I'm like, or you injured it from whatever reason, took too many types of drugs, and I'm like, the liver cells will trigger growth factors, and all of a sudden you start making new cells. You can regenerate it. Cool thing about the liver. Now, some things that can damage your liver, sometimes they're permanent, sometimes they aren't. One is called hepatitis. Now, there are lots of different types of hepatitis. There's hepatitis A and B and C and D and E. And I'm like, there's a whole bunch of different hepatitises. And I'm like, again, it just means something that's going to cause liver inflammation. Some of them are bacteria, some are viral. There's different types of viruses. Other things that can cause damage or inflammation of your liver, different types of drugs. There's certain types of mushrooms that you eat that will cause hepatitis or damage to your liver. Lots of different things can cause inflammation to your liver. Now, depending on what it actually is that's causing it, kind of depends if your liver can recover or not. There are certain viruses that, yes, when they affect your liver is damaged and it's done. There are others that it's going to be cause of short-term inflammation. You know, a few months later, it goes away, you heal yourself, you're fine. Kind of depends. Now, if you have some type of ongoing chronic inflammation, and I'm like, so you can't heal it. Eventually, your cells will start to die. Those liver lobules will start to die. Now, healthy liver looks nice and smooth. The liver up on our cadaver, nice and smooth. It should look like that, nice and smooth. Now, and I'm like, doesn't look quite so pink because, you know, he's not alive and doesn't have blood flow flowing through him. What can happen is if you start damaging that tissue, and I'm like, if you damage it enough, those cells start to die and they get replaced with a fibrous, connective scar tissue. And when it does that, it starts to kind of pull in on the tissue. Instead of having cells, it's kind of pulling in and you get all these little bumps all over your tissue. It's called liver cirrhosis. Now, liver cirrhosis is not good. Generally, when you start damaging all of your tissue, your liver tissue like that, you can't generate new tissue. You would need a full liver transplant. So it's not good. Now, things that can happen from it, nope, I don't remember I had another slide. And I'm like, people that are alcoholics, drinking too much alcohol, can start to damage your liver enough that it can't ever heal itself in between drinking. Certain types of diets, if you have a diet that all you do is eat salt all day, that high salt, that high sodium can actually damage your liver. Long term, we're talking like years and years of high salt diets. Now, and I'm like, it will eventually, you'll have a fatty, fibrous, connective tissue, scar tissue type of liver. It causes what's known as portal hypertension. And I'm like, it means you're going to have too much of a high blood pressure inside your liver. It will no longer be able to filter your blood. You'll end up having jaundice as one of the biggest symptoms to realize you've got some type of liver issue. What's good but bad, people that have liver transplants, usually the transplant is successful. It's got a really good success rate doing a liver transplant. However, livers aren't all that common of an organ that seems to be donated. So it's successful if they had it. One of my good friends, her mother had this, and I'm like, she was not a drinker, but she had a really bad diet. And I'm like, really poor diet. She, yes, had full jaundice, and I'm like, and got a liver transplant, and it's working, but it's rare. Now, back to the bile. It is a yellowish-green alkaline solution. So yes, usually when you see pictures of the gallbladder is usually colored green. Usually gallbladders are green. If you've ever dissected anything or skinned anything and pulled it apart or whatever, if you looked underneath the liver, gallbladders are green. Sometimes they're even like almost like a cool tealish green, depending on the animal. That's because the bile itself is actually that color. Our cadaver, we just, the color is leached out of it as it's been sitting in alcohol. Things that are in bile, two things, bile salts and bilirubin. Bile salts is a cholesterol derivative. It's what is helping make that fat not like each other anymore, that emulsification, making fat not like each other anymore. So it helps kind of, not break it apart, but it will help with the breaking apart later, and it will help with the absorption, having these bile salts. Bilirubin is a pigment that comes from heme. Now, where do you think we find heme? And hemoglobin. Eventually, red blood cells die. Do you remember how long a red blood cell lives for? Longer than that. Anyone remember how long a red blood cell lives? 120-ish days? Oh, yeah, that's right. That's when you say that. Oh, yeah, we all do that. Eventually, 120 days later, or about 4 months, those red blood cells die. I'm like, well, our body tries to recycle. We all love to recycle. Our body tries to recycle. It will break apart the red blood cell. I'm like, the iron can go get stored. The heme part gets broken down. The globin part, which is another protein, and gets reused. So we're looking just at the heme part. Now, the heme part from the breakdown of your red blood cells, yes, it has to go somewhere. Bacteria are going to take that heme, and I'm like, and I was going to say, well, they take the heme, and I'm like, and as they break it down, it produces a pigment called bilirubin. Now, any guess what color bilirubin is? Makes you jaundiced. If it circulates, as it's yellow. Now, this bilirubin, yes, that if it gets into your blood supply, you turn yellow. That's what causes jaundice. Again, it's from the breakdown of red blood cells. However, eventually some of this bilirubin will get filtered out of the blood, and it will end up in your intestines, and the bacteria break down the bilirubin into another pigment called stercobilin, and stercobilin is a brown color, which is why, what color is feces? Brown. Is it ever any other color? Sometimes. I was going to say, I'm like, and then it's like, oh, some random things you can eat. But in general, it's always brown. If you're wondering, why is feces always brown? It's because of the breakdown of your red blood cells. You can't stop that from happening. Now, there are some random types of foods and colored foods that eventually can make certain things change colors. But in general, feces is always brown. It's all from the breakdown of red blood cells. Now, other things we can find in bile, yes, cholesterol is in bile, some fats, some phospholipids, and some electrolytes. I don't care about them as much, though. I care about bile salts and bilirubin. The gallbladder, we said before, I didn't skip two, did I? Nope. Again, it stores the bile. It does not make the bile. It's just a little thin-walled muscular sac right underneath the liver. It stores the bile. It can also concentrate the bile. It's like, well, if my job is to store it, if I get rid of some water and some of the ions, I can store even more bile. I can keep all those bile salts. I can keep all the bilirubin that's there. Now, there will be muscular contractions. It's a muscular sac that, yes, we'll get into hormones that will make that gallbladder contract. And as it contracts, it will push some of the bile out into that bile duct, well, the cystic duct, and then eventually the common bile duct to get into our small intestine. So it just stays there nice and relaxed, storing, concentrating bile, won't do anything until some hormone makes it contract and kind of squirt out some of its bile into the intestine. Now, things that can happen with gallbladders, though. If you have high cholesterol diet, occasionally, like, you can get too few bile salts that can break it down, and you end up having what are known as gallstones. I know you guys all have your gallbladders, but has anyone had gallstones before? Not fun. Now, problems that can happen with gallstones. One, generally, these stones are not usually all rounded and nice and smooth. A lot of times these gallstones are jagged, crystally type things, which, yes, as the gallbladder will contract when it needs to, as it squeezes down on jagged things. Does that feel good? No, it's not going to feel good. Now, I'm like, other than the fact, as every time it contracts, it won't feel good. If you get enough of these gallstones in there, they can actually obstruct the flow of bile from leaving the gallbladder. It's just called obstructive jaundice. And I'm like, that all of a sudden I was going to say, it's not the bile is flowing around, but bilirubin from the bile starts to flow around, and I'm like, and get into the bloodstream. So I was going to say, it's contracting. Now, how they can get rid of it, there are certain drugs that can help try breaking it up. There's ultrasound vibrations, there's laser vaporization, and then there's surgery. So they can actually put lasers right where your gallbladder is and actually like submit like ultrasounds and lasers and try to help break out what's inside of it. A lot of times they'll just remove the gallbladder, because a lot of times if you've had gallstones once, you are at a higher risk of getting them a second time. And sometimes they'll be like, you don't need it anyways, let's just get rid of it and not worry about you ever getting gallstones again. All right, pull out your colored note cards. Find them. You gotta find them somewhere. All right, starting with the first question. Chemical digestion is initiated where? Pink, orange, yellow, or green? So where does chemical digestion start? It's in the mouth. Now, does anyone know what enzyme is there that starts breaking things down? I was going to say, in your saliva you have salivary amylase that's starting to break down starches right away in your mouth. What is a possible side effect of weakening of your cardiac sphincter? If your cardiac sphincter is weak, it is acid reflux into the esophagus. This involves over 22 muscle groups and includes a buccal phase and a pharyngeal esophageal phase. It is the yellow, deglutition. What is deglutition? Swallowing. What's mastication? Chewing. We're not chewing in the pharynx or esophagus. The stomach is able to expand to nearly 100 times its empty volume due to what in the walls? So in your stomach walls, we have rugae, all those little folds that can expand out when it's full. A patient with a low red blood cell count receives vitamin B12 injections every 2 weeks. Why? It is the yellow. The parietal cells in this patient's stomach have ceased producing intrinsic factor, which means they can't absorb vitamin B12 on their own, so they have to get vitamin B12 injections to get into the bloodstream. When your stomach growls in response to an ad on TV for food, the what phase of gastric secretion is initiated? Which happens all the time, even when you're talking about food or thinking about it. It's called the cephalic phase. Now, what part of the body is the cephal refer to? The head. So when you see something, smell something, hear something, any of that, and I'm like just seeing food, not the fact it's in your stomach already. You're seeing it, thinking about it, watching it, whatever. That will trigger your stomach to start making gas, start the gastric secretions and your stomach starts to grow. What cells are responsible for hydrochloric acid production? You guys have to know the cells on Thursday. Hydrochloric acid are the parietal cells. A meal high in fat would do what? If you have a meal high in fat, it's the green. It inhibits gastric emptying. It will stay in the stomach as long as it can, getting broken down as long as possible. In what way is the small intestine well adapted for nutrient absorption? So small intestine, really good at absorption because it has so much surface area. It has folds on top of folds on top of folds. The more surface area, the more nutrient absorption area. The gallbladder does what to bile by doing what with water and ions? It's not orange. It stores bile, but then it doesn't make sense with the rest of it. Dilutes means it's like making it more watery. It's the pink one. It will concentrate the bile because it absorbs water and ions out. So we can reabsorb the water and ions out, and it concentrates what's there. My last review question before we keep going. Cirrhosis of the liver would most severely impact digestion of what? It would impact digestion of lipids because bile is a lipid or a fat emulsifier. It helps make it so the fat doesn't like fat. So it will help in eventually breaking down all of those lipids and fats. All right, on to our part C. Continuing with one more accessory organ. One more. The pancreas. Now, the pancreas is talked about more than just the digestive system because it has endocrine function, which means it has hormone functions. I don't care that much about this, this unit. It also has exocrine functions. Now, what's the difference between endocrine and exocrine? Yeah, and I'm like, endocrine means it's generally anything it makes. I'm like, there's no ducts, and it's going to stay internal. It goes right into blood supply. I don't care about the endocrine function. That's generally as the fact that it's secreting hormones. We'll get to hormones later in lab because it does secrete insulin and glucagon. It helps regulate blood sugar. However, digestion-wise, I don't care about blood sugar. But the pancreas does have an endocrine function because it's got hormones that regulate blood sugar. I care about the exocrine function, which means it is going to secrete through a duct, because we've got a pancreatic duct. It's going to secrete through a duct some type of fluid. And I'm like, now we've got cells called acini cells, and I'm like, for plural, I was going to say acinar cells, and I'm like, for singular, they secrete pancreatic juices, which go into the duodenum, so into that first part of the small intestine through a pancreatic duct. So exocrine always have some type of duct that it is secreting its fluid out. And so the pancreas secretes its fluid, its exocrine fluid, its pancreatic juices out of the pancreas and into the small intestine. Now, our pancreas can make about 1,200 to 1,500 milliliters, or like 1.5 liters of pancreatic juices a day. Again, we got juices getting made everywhere. Stomach juices, gastric juices, intestinal juices, pancreatic juices, liver's making bile. We got juices everywhere, plus all of our saliva. Now, your pancreatic juice is a watery alkaline solution. Its secretion is going into the duodenum, where you have acidic chyme going in. So it's also secreting a slightly alkaline solution to help neutralize some of that acidic chyme. It also has lots of electrolytes, primarily your bicarbonate ion, which is giving it that alkaline pH. And the big one, star it, lots of enzymes. Now, amylases, what does amylases break down? Starch, we found those in our saliva as well. So there's salivary amylase, breaks down starches in our saliva. Pancreatic amylases, it's just the same type of enzyme that breaks down starch, it just comes from the pancreases. What do you think a lipase enzyme breaks down? Breaks down fats, your lipids. Nucleases? Any guess? I was going to say we break down nucleic acids. Where do we find nucleic acids? It's the Na of what 3-letter abbreviation ends in Na? Wow, you guys are quiet. DNA, what other 3-letter abbreviation have we ended in Na? DNA and RNA. Yes, we eat DNA and RNA all day long. So we have to break that down as well. Now, proteases, based on the name, what do you think it breaks down? Proteins. It's like part of the name. Now, the proteases that come from the pancreas are secreted in inactive form. They'll have to get activated, which is one of my next slides. is the proteases. These are just enzymes that break down proteins. Now, some of the enzymes that break down proteins. Now, there is a pepsin that gets secreted in the stomach. That's not a pancreas one. But the protease, some of the main proteases, oh my God, they're really long names. I'm like, one of the big ones called trypsinogen. Anything that has gen in it means it's going to have to generate and become something else. It's like the beginning form, like Genesis is the first book of the Bible. Not that I'm getting religious on you, but it just means making. And so gen just means it's, the beginning of trypsin. We just take off the gen. And so it will have to get activated to trypsin. So trypsinogen is one of these proteases, one of these protein breaking down enzymes. It will get activated to break down trypsin. You say, got it on there. I don't know if I have it on the chemotrypsinogen. Eventually, we'll just get rid of the gen, and it's just chemotrypsin. It's another type of trypsin, another type of protein enzyme. And procarboxypeptidase, big long thing. Again, pro means the beginning of something, like a prologue. So it will, that's the inactive form. We'll just remove the pro, and you become a carboxypeptidase. And so in the intestine, they will get into the active form, and we have multiple protein and protein breaking down enzymes. So we've got a little bit of enzyme breaking down in the stomach with pepsin, but a whole bunch more breaking down of proteins in our intestine with trypsin, the carboxypeptidase, and the chemotrypsin. Now, we also have bile that's also going into the small intestine. I like this picture. I'm like, here's your stomach. I'm going to say, here's your duodenum. Yes, here's your pancreas. Here's your pancreatic ducts and some of the secretions they're making. However, what also is secreting something right here? What big organ's over here? The liver. And so we're also going to have bile going in at the exact same place. They actually join together. You're going to have pancreatic juices coming out from this hole. You're going to have bile coming out from the exact same hole. One hole, they just share it. And so we have bile going there as well. Now, things that will make more bile go into that duodenum. Bile secretion is going to get stimulated by bile salts in the enterohepatic circulation, which I'll show you. But enterohepatic, what two things? What two parts of the system, or not even digestive system, well, yeah. What two parts of our body are we talking about? Entero? It's what part of the body? Intestine, hepatic, liver. And I'm like, there is blood that, yes, can go back and forth, and they chat. The blood actually can go from intestine to liver, and it's like, oh, look what I have. Oh, look what you should do. And so there are bile salts that will get into the blood supply, and will go to the liver, and be like, hey, you should start secreting more bile. Secretin is a hormone that comes from our intestinal cells. Now, if our intestinal cells in the duodenum are all of a sudden getting lots of hydrochloric acid and fatty chyme, because you just got done eating a high-fat diet, that hydrochloric acid and the fatty chyme that's in our intestines will make secretin, this hormone, tell our liver and our gallbladder to contract and say, we need more bile. Because what does bile help break down? Fats. And so we have lots of hydrochloric acid and fatty chyme going into the duodenum. It's like, hey, we need more reinforcements. We need more bile to help start that process of breakdown. Now, generally, you have a sphincter. I don't know if I have a picture on which side. Not yet. There is a sphincter right there that's going to stay closed. You don't have anything ever going in until digestive is active. And so you don't have pancreatic juices. You don't have bile going into your intestine until, yes, it's active. Something is triggering it to open up. Then, yes, it's going to get released into the small intestine only when your gallbladder contracts or your liver contracts along that common bile duct. Now, some more of the regulation of bile secretion. Your gallbladder will contract. Again, it doesn't contract unless it's told to contract. Your gallbladder will contract when it is stimulated by a hormone called cholecystokinin. The cyst part means the bladder for gallbladder. And again, when your intestinal cells have acidic fatty chyme, will tell secretin that it needs to get, I'm like, that your gallbladder needs to contract. We also have another hormone called cholecystokinin that also tells, hey, gallbladder, we need more bile. Your vagal stimulation is a minor stimulus that will cause your gallbladder to contract. Vagal has to do with the face. If you've got food in your mouth that you can feel, seeing food, smelling food, tasting food, and I'm like, just the fact that there's food in your mouth, that may cause a gallbladder to contract a little bit. It's not the main thing. It's generally fatty acid chyme in your intestine makes your gallbladder contract. This CCK, your cholecystokinin hormone, also causes your pancreas to contract and secrete its juices. Now, for the juices to go out, yes, your hepatopancreatic sphincter, that where both the liver and the pancreas join together, and so you've got the one hole, it will relax so all of the secretions can go in. Now, I'm like, I know I've got one more that's like talks about pancreatic secretions. Now, there's multiple hormones, and it's controlling secretions of various things. And I tried to simplify it. I tried to make two different flow diagrams, and I don't know if I like either one. We'll go with my bottom one, which I think is my most recent. I don't know if I love it. If you ate something and you have a lot of acidic chyme that's now in your duodenum, there are three main things it's going to cause. And I'm like, and then it'll kind of review on my next slide. The first thing that it will cause is, number one, is you're going to have bile salts being released. Make sure I leave myself room. One, it's going to stimulate CCK, cholecystokinin, to do two things. One, up there, it will increase gallbladder contraction. So now you have more bile. That's an arrow. The CCK will also increase pancreatic juices to be released. Which I'll talk more on the next slide, but I just wanted this up first. And then we've got, it will also cause secretin to be released. And it does two things. Secretin will increase the amount of bile, I was going to say made and released. And it will also increase the amount of pancreatic juices. However, I don't really care about the enzymes for this. I'm looking generally for the bicarbonate, the alkaline. Because again, if we have acidic chyme, I want lots of alkaline juices. So you may have pancreatic juices that don't have a lot of enzymes, but at least has a lot of bicarbonate ions to neutralize some of the acid. So acidic chyme, you just got done eating some type of, fatty, and I'm like, acidic food. Usually it's fatty. You're going to have more bile salts to break it down. You're going to have two hormones, cholecystokinin and secretin, that are going to make it so we've got more pancreatic juices and more bile to help break all of this down. That's my best summary for all of that. And so this is, regulating the pancreatic secretion. Yes, if you have chyme in the intestine, you're going to have the CCK. That's going to increase the amount of pancreatic juices that are being made and released. Also, if you have, and I'm like, that acidic chyme in there, you're also going to cause the secretion of those bicarbonate-rich pancreatic juices. So a couple hormones that make it so that, yes, we're going to try to make it so there's lots of bile and lots of pancreatic juices in that duodenum. Now, here's that enterohepatic circulation. The fact that, yes, there is blood circulating around, and it's going to go from intestine information, look at that, all the way, and it's going to send information to the liver. And so if you have acidic chyme, fatty chyme that's now going into the intestine, it's my step one. You've got chyme going into the duodenum. It's going to tell the cells that are in there, we need to start releasing cholecystokinin and secretin. Cholecystokinin are my red dots. The secretin are the yellow dots. Bam, they're not in the bloodstream. That's hanging out right there too. Now, the cholecystokinin, the red dots, are going to tell the pancreas, they're going to tell the pancreas, you need to start making more juices. There we go. It's releasing juices. Also, the bile salts, and I'm like, well, we got bile salts eventually, and some secreted are going to tell the liver to make more bile. We've got more bile getting made. But your cholecystokinin, the red dots that are going to go to the liver are going to tell that gallbladder to contract. And you're going to have more bile now going into, it's going to contract, more bile, all the way down here, there it is. More bile is now going to be in your intestine to hopefully break down whatever fat it is that was in that chyme. So several hormones, but yes, they make it all the way around, chatting with each other, telling it's like, hey, I've got fat, I need more bile, all right. I need more pancreatic juices, please neutralize all my acid. And they all talk. Oh, I broke it down, steps, there you go. Now, digesting in the small intestine. So we've got food in the intestine, we've got enzymes in the intestine, but we actually have to break everything down in the intestine as well. So chyme from the stomach, you know, Mike, again, it kind of looks like food, but by the time it goes from the stomach into the intestine, you have some partially digested carbohydrates and proteins. Partially digested carbohydrates because you've got salivary amylase that was starting to break down carbohydrates before it ever got to the stomach. Partially digested proteins because there's an enzyme in your stomach called pepsin that starts to break it down. No fat gets broken down in the stomach. That doesn't come to the duodenum until you start getting bile salts. Once food hangs out in the small intestine, it hangs out there for 3 to 6 hours. This is where you get almost all, not 100%, almost all nutrients absorbed in your small intestine, as well as most water being absorbed. Now, like the small intestine, between your saliva, between your gastric juices, between your intestinal juices, between your pancreatic juices, you have lots of juices that are eventually all going to end into the intestine. Lots of liters of fluid, and this is where you get most of those fluids that you're getting made that end up there are all water-based. We have to absorb a lot of water so we can make more juices. Now, there's no role in ingestion or defecation. Your small intestine has nothing to do with food going in, and also has nothing with food going out. It's just trying to absorb as much as possible. It's got all that great surface area. Now, requirements for this breakdown of food and absorption of food. 1, you need a slow delivery of acidic hypertonic chyme. Slow, you know, Mike, is because, 1, it's acidic. If you put too much acid from the stomach into the intestine, it's going to start to destroy your duodenum. It can't handle that low pH. Also because of the slow, chyme is hypertonic. It has lots and lots of solutes in it compared to water. Now, if you had too much hypertonic, it has too many solutes in it going into the duodenum, it would start to pull too much water into the duodenum. And we don't want water. We've got enough juices coming in. We don't need to pull any more water with it. So we've got nice slow release of this acidic hypertonic chyme. Also, in the duodenum, you have to have bile, you have to have enzymes, and you have to have bicarbonate ions. Again, neutralizing acids starting to break down some of these nutrients in there. And then you have to have lots of mixing to get all of it to mix together. If you've got all these things to help break it up, you need to make sure it all mixes with whatever it is you're trying to break up. So one of the first things we can do with mixing is called segmentation. Now, as you've got food moving around, again, usually when you eat, people don't generally just snack all day long. There are some that do. And I'm like, more power to you. And I'm like, most people are like, I eat 3 meals a day. And that's it. That means your food kind of travels together. But we don't want our food to travel together. We want it to be nice and slow and even. Part of that's regulated by the stomach, little bits at a time. But also in your intestine, we want little bits at a time. So we start to segment up our food. We can do this as that small intestine is actually contracting down. It does it with long, slow contractions and short, quick contractions. And it starts to help break the food down and segment it into smaller bits. Kind of spreads it out in smaller bits in the small intestine. Makes it nice and even, nice and small. Also helps with mixing. The two different types of our nervous system that helps with this is our parasympathetic and a little bit with the sympathetic. When is your parasympathetic nervous system in action? It's the rest and digest. And so your parasympathetic nervous system is really helping, break it down. Your sympathetic nervous system, I'm like, is trying to relax. That doesn't mean it's not doing anything. And I'm like, but it's more trying to relax than anything else. Now, when food starts to get to the end of the intestines, it's been kind of heading all the way through. It's almost gotten all into the large intestine. We don't need to segment anymore. And so this slows down in that late intestinal phase. Food's going into the large intestine. We don't have to waste our energy contracting and trying to mix up anything that's in the small intestine anymore. So this is just helping squeeze and break it apart in small sections. The actual act of making food go from, area A to area B, one-way direction is called peristalsis. We're still contracting our muscles in our intestine, but as we are contracting, we're constantly contracting behind the food, kind of pinching it forward to try to move that food from point A to point B. Now, hormone called motility, it's moto, we're moving something, and I'm like, helps move food along. And so it tries to get any food, any bacteria, and any debris out of the small intestine and into the large intestine so that our small intestine is ready for the next meal. We're just squeezing it along. Now, before it goes into the large intestine, at the very, very end, we have that ileocecal sphincter. It has to relax so that food can go through one direction into the large intestine. Again, the last part of the small intestine is ileum. First part of the large intestine, the cecum, ileocecal valve, ileocecal sphincter. Now the gastroileal reflex, and I'm like, this just means food in the ileum, enhances the force of segmentation. And so if you have food in the ileum, food might not look like that anymore, but if you have food in the ileum, it expands out a little bit, and it makes your stomach squish down even harder to try to help propel that food through. Gastrin hormone also increases the motility of the ileum, that last part of the small intestine. Also, to squeeze on that food, again, trying to get that food out of the small intestine and into the large intestine. Now, the ileocecal sphincter, also called the valve, interchangeable. Yes, once the food goes into the large intestine, if it tries to go backwards, the pressure generated by the pressure going backwards closes that valve. Exact same thing of what happened in the heart. We push blood out. As it tries to go backwards, those valves snap shut. So it prevents regurgitation into the ileum. It prevents food from going from the large intestine backwards into the ileum. We want a one-way direction of our food. So we are now into the large intestine. We squeezed it through the ileocecal valve. Now, some features of our large intestine. One, we have, it's called the Tenei coli. It's just the fact that along our large intestine, we have the smooth muscle that kind of holds it and kind of anchors it, all together. It's a little bit of just support for the large intestine. We also have haustra. Each one of these little kind of bulb sections are called haustra. Now, some of it's formed by just that muscle, that support muscle that's in there, and it helps these little pockets. As food is moving through, they kind of get bumped around on the inside too. Again, food, it's like feces at this point. But as it's moving through it, they kind of, bump along on the inside of there, and it does a little bit more mixing inside of there. And then we have these epiploic appendages, these little tiny fatty pouches that we are unsure of what they do. We still don't know everything about the human body. So we've got these little fatty pouches as well hanging out there. Maybe it's just some extra fat storage, but we're not completely sure what they're for. I would say lab, some review, different parts of the large intestine, cecums, a little section that hangs down, appendix hangs off of it. You have your different regions of the colon, you have the rectum, and you have the anal canal on the way out. There's your large intestine. Now, cecum is that first part of the large intestine. The appendix, the little dangly thing hanging off on there. It's a mass of lymphoid tissue. It is part of the immune system, even though it hangs off the digestive system. Now, it is a bacterial storehouse. Again, and I'm like, there's theories on, you can live without it, so there's theories on like why it was necessary at one point. And they think part of it is if for whatever reason you get rid of all the bacteria in your intestine, now you've got some extra bacteria, you can recolonize your large intestine. What can happen though is that this can become twisted, or you could have a blockage at the end, where it connects, which means all the bacteria that are in here are going to do what bacteria like to do, and they're going to reproduce and multiply. And if they can't go into the large intestine, this gets larger and larger, and you now have what? What's it called? Appendicitis. You have an inflammation of the appendix. Now, because it's bacteria that are reproducing and making it so large, it could burst. Why is that really bad? You have bacteria all over your abdominal cavity. So they try to remove it before that would happen. Otherwise, you are on strong antibiotics and you are hanging out in the hospital for a couple weeks. Or at least a few days. Depends. Different parts of the colon. I don't really need to go over all this because, well, we did it all in lab. But there's the different parts of the colon and your flexures. There we go. Now, the rectum, different parts of the rectum. One, we have 3 rectal valves. So at the very top, we can see one of them that sticks inside the rectum area. Bonus for the rectal valves. It stops feces from being passed with gas. Yay for it. And I'm like, that means every time you pass gas, feces would come out. That's not good. Because we'll get to how much gas later, maybe on the audio. I'm like, how much gas you pass a day? And so, yay for the rectal valves that prevent feces from just leaving all the time. The last part, we have the anal canal, last part of the large intestine. It opens up to the anus, and there are 2 sphincters there. There's an internal and an external. Internal is made of smooth muscle, external is made of skeletal muscle. Which one can you control? You can control the external sphincter. So you have an internal sphincter made up of smooth muscle, external sphincter made up of skeletal muscle. You can control the external sphincter. You can control that skeletal muscle so you can hold it in, hopefully, if you're not near a bathroom. Now, looking microscopically at the large intestine, one, they have a thicker mucosa of simple columnar epithelium throughout the large intestine. The only place we don't have that simple columnar epithelium is near the anal canal, because yes, there's possible abrasion as you wipe. And so we have stratified squamous epithelium right there at the anal canal opening. There are no circular folds or villi. We don't need that. And we find those in the small intestine. They give great surface area for absorption. We're not really that worried about absorption at this point of nutrients because most of that took place in the small intestine. So we don't have any folds. We don't have any villi. We don't have any digestive secretions. There's no pancreas sending anything in. There's no bile going in. We do, however, have an abundant deep crypts of goblet cells. Goblet cells make mucus. And so this feces, by the time it's here, it's feces. And I'm like, yes, we've absorbed a lot of the water out. However, those goblet cells that make mucus allow that feces to move through a little bit easier. So it just aids the passage of the feces through. And at the end of the large intestine, we also have a bunch of veins. So we have superficial venous plexuses of the anal canal. It just means that we have blood vessels. And I'm like, so we've got different blood vessels right here along the anal canal. If these blood vessels get inflamed, they can enlarge to the point that the blood vessels will actually protrude out of the anal canal. I think if I remember, you can look or not, I think I've got a picture coming up. And I'm like, and you're like, oh, let's see that. Don't look, because I don't remember, I think I've got a picture I threw on there. And I'm like, but it's what our hemorrhoids are. It's these big, huge blood vessels have enlarged so much they stick out of the anal canal. Oh, I didn't. Oh, good for you guys. At some point, I know I'm on a PowerPoint somewhere, I found a picture. You guys can Google that later. Bacteria. You have bacteria in your large intestines. Lots and lots of bacteria. Now, bacteria, yes, they can come from the small intestine or they can come from the anus. A lot of bacteria die once they get into the stomach because they can't handle that low pH, but that doesn't mean all bacteria die once it goes through the small intestine and the stomach. So some bacteria can get into the large intestine. They came from higher up from the small intestine. Some bacteria come from the anus area, and they colonize the colon. Not all bacteria are bad. There are some good bacteria. Some will make vitamins. Never knew. Bacteria can make vitamins. And so some of the bacteria that are hanging out in your intestine make B vitamins and K vitamins. Yay! We'll absorb them as well there. So not a lot of absorption of nutrients take place in the large intestine, but since vitamins are made there, we can absorb those particular vitamins there as well. Some of the bacteria, they're going to break down molecules like heparin. Again, they can help break down some larger molecules. They can start to break down carbohydrates, your fiber, your cellulose. Now, not all fiber can get broken down. Bacteria try their hardest. And as they try to break apart some of those indigestible carbohydrates that made it all the way there, one of the side, not effects, but one of the byproducts of breaking down the carbohydrates is gas. And so you release gases, about 500 milliliters of gas a day. So if you didn't realize that, yes, you release 500 milliliters of gas. I'm trying to think, I don't remember how many milliliters. This is only 355. More than this of gas a day, whether you realize it or not. And luckily, feces doesn't go with it. Now, other things other than bacteria we can find in our intestines. We can find viruses. We can find protozoans. So we can find lots of things. Occasionally, not occasionally, a lot of times viruses and protozoans, we've got parts of our body that prevent them from penetrating our system. Doesn't mean it always works, but our immune system is there to try to prevent bacteria, viruses, and protozoans from getting into our body. Now, part of the reason they do this, we have epithelial cells. One, it's a barrier. You know, we've got a wall to try to prevent these from getting in. Also, some of the cells in this mucosa wall can recruit dendritic cells. These are immune system cells that are like, all right, what are you? You're okay. Okay, you're not okay. And they're constantly looking to see what type of cells, whether bacteria, viruses, protozoans, things are. And then they can present it to the immune system like, hey, you are foreign and we don't like it. Here, white blood cell, please eat this and get rid of it. And so we've got cells that are constantly monitoring all the blood, all the tissue around the large intestine because there are so many possible pathogens that can get into our body. But we've got lots of things in place to try to prevent that, lots of immune system cells and different immune system structures. Now, digestive process in the large intestine, food hangs out, food, if you want to call it that anymore, residue remains in the large intestine for about 12 to 24 hours. By the time it gets there, we're really not breaking food down. The small intestine did that. The bacteria can break down some of the food as they're trying to break down some of those carbohydrates, but there's really not any food breakdown anymore. Vitamins that the bacteria made, some of the B vitamins and K vitamins, water and electrolytes, such as sodium and chloride, can get absorbed in your large intestine. So most water is absorbed in the small intestine. Some more water can get absorbed in the large intestine as well to really compact that feces, as well as some electrolytes. Now, one of the other major functions, so we are absorbing things. Another major function of the large intestine is to get the feces out of the body. It's to move that feces forward, get it into the anal canal, and eventually instigate defecation and get it out of the body. Now, the colon is not essential for life. I'm like, really, the things that are happening in the colon, not necessary. The fact that the bacteria that can live in there make B and K vitamins, You can get B and K vitamins in your diet and absorb them just fine in their small intestine. You can absorb water and electrolytes, also in your small intestine. You can live without your colon. So people that have colon cancer, you can remove the colon and you're still fine. Now, moving food through. One, haustra are the little pouches that are all along the large intestine, and they'll constantly be contracting, kind of slowly trying to move food through. Now, they contract in response to distension if there's feces in there. They're not going to contract if there's nothing there to contract on. Now, what will cause them to, move, really contract hard and move the food through is a reflex. Now, it's called the gastrocolic reflex. Talking about stomach, talking about the colon. If there is food in your stomach or has recently been in your stomach, the fact that your stomach is stretching will actually tell your colon, oh, we need to contract a little harder now. It's our body's way of saying, food going in, food had better be leaving. And so when food is going into your stomach, your body's like, oh, I need to make room. Let's get rid of what might possibly be in my large intestine. And you have somewhere between 3 to 4 powerful peristaltic waves that are trying to squeeze your colon as much as it can, to try to get that feces either out or moved forward. We call it mass movements. Now, that does not mean that you defecate 3 to 4 times a day. If you ate all day long and you ate a ton, easily you could defecate that many times. But it just means that 3 to 4 times a day, your colon is trying to push that feces to the end of the large intestine. And that, yes, if you've never realized it, and you will now, oh yeah, I do have to use the bathroom right after I get done eating. Oh, that's your gastrocolic reflex. Now, if you've ever had a dog, when do they need to go to the bathroom and go number 2? After every meal they have, and then every other time in between them too. And I'm like, after your dog eats, it's a little more evident because dogs don't defecate more than just 1 time a day. It can be several times throughout the day, and it's usually right after meals. That's their gastrocolic reflex as well working. Now, some things that can happen with the large intestines, your imbalances. If you have a low fiber diet, because they tell you, make sure you eat lots of fiber, you're going to have a narrow colon, which means when it does contract, you're going to have a stronger contraction of a narrower colon. That's not really a good thing. If you have too strong of a contraction on a narrow colon, it puts too much pressure on the walls of your colon, and all of a sudden you start to have, I'm going to say, these herniations. The fact that the intestinal wall can't stay in the same shape, and you start to have these little herniations, these little, bubbles coming out. It looks like little bubbles. That's not good. It's called diverticula. Is when you have these little herniations of your intestinal wall. It's your intestine is just contracting too hard. There was too much pressure on there. Now, when this is starting to happen, that you start to get these little herniations on your intestinal wall, it's just called diverticulosis. It's very common, happens usually in that last part of the colon, the sigmoid colon, because it's really just trying to push that food out of there. And it affects half of people that are 70 years and older. And I'm like, again, it can be painful. Like as their colon's trying to contract and you've got these herniations. Now, the worst part is if you have diverticulitis, is when these diverticula, these herniations, start to rupture. Because what's in your large intestine? Feces, which has lots of what? Lots of bacteria. And so now you have feces and bacteria that, again, are leaking into your abdominal cavity. That can be life-threatening. And so if you start to have diverticulosis, again, they're going to be like, oh my goodness, get back on a high-fiber diet. Hopefully your colon can get back into just contracting normally, not a lot of pressure, and it will go back. I was going to say, I'm like, I want to get, how many slides do I have left? Ooh, we're going to do it. Now, defecation reflex, I won't watch that video, is getting food out of there. Yes, there's a defecation reflex that says you have the urge that you have to do a number 2. You have to defecate. Now, generally, it's going to happen because, I'm going to get there. Well, it's because you're going to have distension. You're going to have stretching in that rectal wall. If you have feces that's going from your sigmoid colon into the rectum, you have sensors right there that they're going to stretch. They're going to send information to your brain that says, we have food in our rectum. We need to defecate right now. And I'm like, so that's your parasympathetic signals. It's realizing there's food there. Now, luckily for us, we have control over the external anal sphincter. And so if you are in the bathroom, you can relax it. If you are not, you can keep it contracted until you can get to the bathroom. Things that can help with defecation, we'll have talked about this in the respiratory system, is the Valsalva's maneuver. You can close your glottis, you can close your opening, you can contract your diaphragm, which will push it down, which will push on your abdominal walls. You can contract it all, try to generate enough pressure in your abdomen. That pressure will help push that feces out. It just increases the pressure in there. Now, after that all happens, I was going to say your anal canal starts to lift up as your feces leaves the body, and you have just got done defecating. There you go. I forgot, I did go over this. If you've ever heard of anyone that had irritable bowel syndrome, it's not a disease, because they don't know exactly, it's not like, oh, it's caused by a bacteria. And I'm like, but it's a general term for any time you have any type of reoccurring pain in your intestines. Stress makes it worse. And I'm like, it's just pain in the intestines. Irritable bowel syndrome.